What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. Flashbacks provide a wider context for the story's present, and it's most effective to illustrate or magnify your character's internal conflict in the present. Now, don't go crazy with flashbacks and backstory. You want to think of it as significant history. The story has a memory. That's a more useful way to think of past time in your story. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach, and each week we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. Often I'll read a manuscript where it's not clear where in time and place the scene is unfolding. I ask, where are we in relation to the scene that just happened? Where and when does this scene take place? There are no time markers, and so I don't know where in time the scene is taking place or how much time has passed from one scene to the next, from one event to the next. So keeping your story grounded in space and time helps you balance the pacing of your story, and it helps your reader navigate the story. But when you shift too rapidly between locations or time periods, it's disorienting. You also don't want to spend too much time in one place or time because that can be boring. You want to find the right rhythm and pacing for your story. It is a practice. It's trial and error. And a lot of this happens in revision, not necessarily in the first draft. But that doesn't mean that you can't harness time and place in your novel in the first draft. In fact, it's much easier to write a first draft when you have some markers in time and setting, when you have a frame in which the scenes are contextualized. We need to know where and when a scene takes place. We need transitions, smooth transitions between scenes, or time jumps. So you want to find seamless ways to transition between different settings or time periods without jarring the reader. So in this episode, you'll get clear on time passing in your story so that you can guide the reader and help them navigate the story, and then make transitions between time and various settings as your characters move through time and space. So let's get right to it. First, let's look at different aspects of time at play in your story. These are decisions you'll make ahead of time. Number 1 is narrative time. This is how much time your story's main action takes from start to finish. It's the forward-moving action. It's not the backstory. It's not flashbacks. We'll get to that. It's the main action of your novel, the present forward-moving action. Now, there's different ways of telling a story. There's chronological time. So the character is experiencing the events as they unfold. It's a linear structure, a chronological structure. So the story is unfolding as the character experiences the events for the first time. Other stories, and I would say many, dip into the past They dip into the deeper past and then bring us back to the present. So it's not told in chronological order. Other stories are told retrospectively. And so the main movement of the narrative is made up of events that have already happened. The character has already lived through the events and is telling the story through the lens of experience and wisdom. The present is only shown as a way to show how the character has grown through the past, gained wisdom, or come to some reckoning or deeper self-knowledge or acceptance of the past. So we have a linear structure, a nonlinear structure, and a retrospective structure. But whichever you choose, you still want to keep readers grounded in space and time. So the first time frame to get clear on is narrative time. How much time passes from the beginning of your story to its end? So you think of the story's pattern or shape. For example, if your story is a happy story, your main character begins unhappy and moves towards happiness. If it's tragic, he begins happy and ends unhappy. If he starts off in stasis or equilibrium, something happens to shake things up and he moves towards something different. So what's the trajectory of that change? First question, how much time passes from beginning to end? Is it a year? Is it a season? A short story will usually, but not always, revolve around one single event. An evening, for example, or one day, or an afternoon, a weekend. Novels have a bigger canvas and so will span more time, but that doesn't mean the novel has to span decades. It could, but this is usually more challenging for writers to harness. David Nicholls' novel One Day spans 20 years, but only on one particular day out of each year. So although it spans 2 decades, it's contained. A novel could encompass a summer, or it could span months or a year. So you just want to be specific. For example, in the novel Sophie's Choice, the action occurs primarily between June and October 1947, with key events related to the plot having already taken place between 1939 and 1947. The Mars Room is set in California at the Stanfield Women's Correctional Facility from 2003 to 2008. Now, the Mars Room tells the story of Romy Hall, who's serving 2 consecutive life sentences plus 6 years for the murder of her stalker, Kurt Kennedy. In The Hate U Give, the narrative time spans roughly a few weeks, primarily focusing on the immediate aftermath of Starr witnessing the fatal shooting of her friend Callie by a police officer and the subsequent personal struggles she faces in the following days and weeks. So everything revolves around this central event. The shooting of Khalil is the pivotal moment, and most of the story happens around this event, the fallout of that pivotal event. It utilizes some flashbacks to provide context about Starr's life and relationships with Callie before the shooting, but it focuses more on the immediate and social repercussions of the shooting on Starr and her community. The novel Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates takes place over a 6-month period in 1955 with flashbacks to help fill out the story. So basically it's from spring to fall in 1955 with flashbacks, but the main storyline is from spring to fall in 1955. So number 1, narrative time. The forward-moving action, not the backstory, not the flashbacks, the now story. This is more for you to contain your story within a frame so you can move your characters and your reader through time and space. Okay, on to number 2, pastime. Flashbacks provide a wider context for the story's present, and it's most effective to illustrate or magnify your character's internal conflict in the present. Now, don't go crazy with flashbacks and backstory. You want to think of it as significant history. The story has a memory. That's a more useful way to think of past time in your story. For example, in Angie Thomas's novel, The Hate You Give, the novel does utilize flashbacks to provide context about Star's life and her relationship with Kali before the shooting. The Mars Room references Romy's past throughout the novel, but only goes into active flashback at the end when we see her fatal confrontation with her stalker. Before that, the past is delivered in brief flashes without giving it all away. Revolutionary Road focuses on Frank and April Wheeler's desire to move to Paris and escape the American dream, which has become a trap for both of them. April has no inner conflict. She's raring to go. But Frank, the main character, is more conflicted. He hates his job, but it gives him and his family stability and security. The backstory, told in flashback, dramatizes that inner conflict. We learn, for example, that his father, who worked at the very same building Frank now works in, was passed over for promotion when Frank was young. This is key to what happens at the end. Frank does wind up taking a promotion instead of moving to Paris. And the reason he takes the promotion is because his wife becomes pregnant with their third child. We also get a significant flashback that captures the inner conflict he has about his job, hating it while also craving the financial security and status it provides. And this is encapsulated in a flashback chapter in which Frank goes to work with his dad one day. Here's the excerpt. Frank's eyes kept wandering from the machines to his own reflection in the plate glass. He thought he looked surprisingly dignified in his new suit, with its coat and tie almost exactly like his father's, and it pleased him to see this bright image of the two of them, man and boy, with the endless swarm of people moving past on the sidewalk behind them. After a minute, he backed several steps away and looked straight up until his collar cramped the back of his neck. And wow, he would admit he'd hoped for a skyscraper, but the last of his disappointment was vanishing now in this one long look. Up and up and up the tiers of windows rose, each smaller and more foreshortened than the one beneath, until their ever-narrowing sills and lintels seemed to merge. Then he saw that the high cornice was moving slowly and steadily forward against the sky. The building was falling over on them, but there was no time for panic before he saw his mistake. It was the sky that moved, white clouds floating back over the ledge of the roof. And in the instant his mind came into focus on this fact, he felt a shiver of wonder down his spine at the enormous granite strength and stillness of the building. Wow. Okay, so he expresses wonder at the tallness of the building and the grandeur of the building and the excitement of the city. His father says, okay, we're going to get our haircuts and then we're going to go up in the elevator to the office. But as things turned out, that preliminary moment on the sidewalk was the high point of the day. The barber shop proved to be nice enough, and so did the echoing marble-flagged lobby, which smelled of cigars and umbrellas and ladies' perfume. But from there on, the pleasures of the day began to dwindle steadily. The elevator gave no sense of flight, for one thing, but only of confinement and nausea. Of the office itself, the top floor, he remembered only an acre of white lights and a very thin lady whose open-work blouse revealed an incredible number of straps that were apparently connected with her underwear, who called him Sonny and showed him how the water cooler worked. And he would never forget the instantaneous revulsion he felt in the presence of Mr. Oatfields, who, if not the biggest, was certainly the fattest man he had ever seen. Oatfield's glasses mirrored staring images of the office lights so that you couldn't see what his eyes were doing when he talked to you, and he talked in a very loud voice without seeming to hear your replies. So, past time, events that happened before we meet the characters on page 1 and are significant to the present conflict. Flashbacks and backstory must reveal deeper insight into a character. In The Hate U Give, the first chapter focuses on the friendship between Star and Khalil, and it ends with her taking a ride in Khalil's Impala. And this sets up what happens in Chapter 2. Chapter 2 begins with a brief flashback that gives context for what's about to happen. It foreshadows. Here's the excerpt. When I was 12, my parents had 2 talks with me. One was the usual birds and bees. Well, I didn't really get the usual version. My mom, Lisa, is a registered nurse, and she told me what went where and what didn't need to go here, there, or any damn where till I'm grown. Back then, I doubted anything was going anywhere anyway. While all the other girls sprouted breasts between 6th and 7th grade, my chest was as flat as my back. The other talk was about what to do if a cop stopped me. Mama fussed and told Daddy I was too young for that. He argued that I wasn't too young to get arrested or shot. Star, you do whatever they tell you to do, he said. Keep your hands visible. Don't make any sudden moves. Only speak when they speak to you. I knew it must have been serious. Daddy has the biggest mouth of anybody I know, and if he said to be quiet, I needed to be quiet. I hope somebody had that talk with Khalil. Okay, on to number 3, psychic distance. This is something I learned from John Gardner from The Art of Fiction, and my teachers would often ask me this: how much time has passed between the events and the telling? So is your main character experiencing the events as they're unfolding, or have they lived through the events and are telling the story through the perspective of wisdom or regret? A retrospective narrator is telling the story having already lived the events with an adult perspective or an older perspective, a wiser perspective. In The Hate U Give, we're getting the events straight up as Star experiences what's happening. It's written in the present tense. But when Star moves into a flashback, when she moves into past time, however briefly, there's more psychic distance. There's more distance between the events and the telling. The Mars Room is written in past tense, but it's not told from a retrospective stance. It's unfolding as Romy experiences it. As Romy experiences incarceration and tries to break free. So those flashback scenes, which happen closer to the end as the stakes build, those events are impacting the present. The past is told with greater psychic distance. Okay, so we have narrative time, past time, and psychic distance. Now let's talk about how to mark time through your story so that each scene keeps us situated on where we are in time and place. This is after Frank and April have a fight. This is chapter 3. This is how he marks the time. A shrill metallic whine cut through the silence of his sleep. He tried to hide from it, cuddling deeper into a cool darkness where the mists of an absorbing dream still floated, but it came tearing back again and again until his eyes popped open in the sunshine. It was after 11 o'clock Saturday morning. Both his nostrils were plugged as if with rubber cement. His head ached, and the first fly of the season was crawling up the inside of a clouded whiskey glass that stood on the floor beside a nearly empty bottle. Okay, so there's a timestamp. And then in chapter 6, everything's sort of going out of focus, she said. I mean, I feel fine and everything, but I guess we'd better eat something. They were in an expensive brick-walled restaurant on West 10th Street, and Maureen had talked for half an hour in a breathless autobiographical rush, pausing only once to let him telephone Mr. Jorgensen and arrange for one of the other girls to take the reception desk for the afternoon. Here are some timestamps from The Hate U Give. Chapter 2. When I was 12, my parents had 2 talks with me. So we know that she's going back in time, and then she launches back into the present. I hope somebody had that talk with Khalil. He cusses under his breath, turns Tupac down, and maneuvers the Impala to the side of the street. We're on Carnation, where most of the houses are abandoned and half the street lights are busted. Nobody around but us and the cop. Here's another timestamp from later in the novel. We spend the night at Uncle Carlos's house because the riots started again as soon as the sun went down. Okay, so again, that's how we begin the chapter, and I'm just going through random chapters. It takes an untouched stack of pancakes for Mama to say, "All right, Munch, what's up?" We have a table to ourselves in IHOP. It's early morning, and the restaurant's almost empty, except for us and these big-bellied, bearded truckers stuffing their faces in a booth. So, place and time. You want those timestamps. You want to situate us in the scene where the characters are and when in relation to what has happened earlier. If you're going back in time, again, a timestamp. When I was 12. If you're moving forward in time, something like Monday morning, I know something is up when I first step into Williamson. Or my interview aired yesterday on Diane Carsey's Friday night news special. This morning, John, the producer, called and said it's one of the most watched interviews in the network's history. So timestamps help the reader know how the story is laid out sequentially and when we're moving back in time and how each scene relates to the scenes that came before. Okay, so let's wrap this up. We talked about 3 different aspects of time to clarify in your story. Number 1, narrative time, your story's main action from beginning to end. How much time does it take to tell the story? Number 2, past time. These are your relevant flashbacks or backstory. Think of past time as your story's memory. Past time should have a significant relationship to your forward-moving story. Number 3, psychic distance. How much time has passed between the event and the telling? The psychic distance will likely shift throughout your story. Sometimes the distance will be close, and other times, for example, during a flashback or in any retrospective story or event, the distance between the event and the telling will be farther. Finally, we talked about how to establish time and place in each scene using time and place markers. When I was 12, it was afternoon at the IHOP. You don't need to establish this in the first line, but you do want these time and place markers as soon as possible in each scene. Showing the passage of time is one of the easiest ways to move your story forward and establish when and where a scene is taking place and how much time has passed from one scene to the next or one event to the next. It's how you create flow and continuity in your story. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.